Now I'm thinking about like how consumerism ties into my own personal narrative. So like what consumer objects influenced my childhood and what impact did that have on the rest of my life? Because I have these very concrete memories of like objects and things that were like made in mass, and like how does that affect all of us? And those are kind of some of the questions I'm trying to answer. My name is Jon Bolt and I am a visual artist. 1, 2, 3, action. Boom. I never get to do that. My work kind of like started like really basic. Like I was just like one of those like urban explorer photographers, and I just enjoyed going to spaces that weren't occupied a whole lot, and I kind of enjoyed that scene. I became more and more concerned with like environmental issues, what global warming's impacts will be, will we inevitably like reach extinction, like that kind of thing. So a lot of like my ideas kind of went into the realm of suburban sprawl and then eventually consumerism. I use this process called LiDAR scanning, where I'm able to scan objects in the real world, and I use like the reference images from like a recording in order to create a 3D model. I can use Blender where I render out images, or I can like actually make like explorable 3D worlds through like Unreal Engine or Unity. I read a lot into the idea of culture jamming, which basically is how artists are able to like critique, subvert, or like the word that's used in the book, jam the workings of consumer culture from inside of it. Our culture in general, it's like very oversaturated. We're constantly surrounded by images. I absolutely love saturated colors. I mean, what I'm wearing. Magentas, purples, turquoises, kind of like in the realm of like neon, ultra bright, ultra saturated, trying in every way to get your attention. That's how advertisements are communicated to a potential audience. Like there's no breaks for the eye. There's so many things competing and trying to yell as loud as they can visually in order for you to buy their product. It's called a LiDAR scanner. So it's this black dot right here. And what it does is emits a laser, hits the object, and then reflects back to the source. And that's how it's able to detect space. So like if it hits this part, it's gonna take less time to hit here than it is here. And that's how it knows that there's like a contour here. My end goal is to capture every possible portion of this object. And then it literally takes like a couple of minutes, and then once it's done, I'll show you what it looks like in comparison to the actual object. But like it's extremely photoreal, especially with like organic material. So like tree bark, shells, things that have a lot of texture. So like smooth objects, reflective objects don't really work. And it's like really easy way to make 3D models, because digital 3D isn't the most accessible, easy to learn. It's very complicated, and it's good to have like tools like this that kind of simplify that. So yeah, this is it. Cool. In comparison to that shell, yeah. This one will be fun. So like this is what my image would look like textureless. Holy shit. This one's Havoc. This was actually 3D scans I was making during a Squishmallow drop at a Five Below store. This one's especially fun, and I want to kind of utilize stuff like this in like my like 3D worlds where you can actually like walk around and interact similar to this. I hastily scanned, so like I'm only getting like one side of a person. So this person's exactly like, you know, like half. They cave in, they mesh into other things because like, you know, the program doesn't really know what's going on. So, and I really like those artifacts, like kind of like these weird distortions is why I like 3D art. There's like kind of like this uncanny valley where if it's not realistic, it's very, very easy to tell that it's fake, and sometimes it can even be creepy. But like I try to exploit that. I'm like, okay, 3D can be more than just photorealistic. I can make this as convoluted and as weird as I want to. Damn. I can also do the exact opposite. So I can make objects in 3D and use like technologies like 3D printing to bring them back into the real world. Recently, I've been really looking deeply into like object making. So I've been trying to like kind of conjure ways to talk about like a more personal narrative to me. So talking about like consumer objects from my past. I've been designing like these little like appropriations of like Hot Wheel cars I used to have as a kid that like are more satirical than they are like an actual thing that you could like use/play with. So I've been working with this method called plastic injection molding. Depending on what type of plastic it is, I can actually melt it down and reuse the material in like the form of like a mold. This was a big part of my summer. I was running through like the garbage cans at the drive-in theater that I worked at. Yeah, I was finding like Tim Hortons, Starbucks cups, etc. And I'm cutting these up into small pieces, loading them into this machine, and then melting them down and creating like my model cars out of the thrown away materials. In the context of I worked at the drive-in theater, I didn't look as weird. But like when I pull up to the Tim Hortons at midnight running through the garbage, I do get a lot more like strange looks. You can tell, because like this is the material they gave me that came with it, which is also polypropylene, but this is the material from the cup. So you can actually see like little like areas where it's like you can see it, like the branding of the cup. So like there's a bunch of red spots in there, and that's because one of the cups I cut up was a Wendy's cup. Oh, so you still have like kind of like those artifacts from the brands within the material, and I think that's kind of interesting. From cup to mold. Perfect. Ta-da. And the materials are really interesting. You can see like the little scatters of like red and blue. My intentions with art is just to like help me process, you know, like different feelings I had throughout my childhood, and like how do I process like some of these like news cycle things like fast fashion, or like, you know, like global warming, or like, you know, like the changing of like weather and tides. I did this project a couple years ago called Wastelands, where I was scanning objects that were being thrown away at the Goodwill I worked at, and like basically I was making like these landscapes entirely consisted of garbage. A lot of the stuff we threw away were kids' toys, were play sets, and they're plastics. Every single thing in all of these images is in a landfill now and will take thousands of years to biodegrade. Now I'm thinking about like how consumerism ties into my own personal narrative. What consumer objects influenced my childhood, and what impact did that have on the rest of my life? Because I have these very concrete memories of like objects and things that were like made in mass, and like how does that affect all of us? And those are kind of some of the questions I'm trying to answer. It's definitely like challenging to be able to successfully make a living with art. It is possible, but like also a lot of artists that like have visited this school, or if I've heard in like artist talks, are very, you know, clear about saying, yeah, like I have another job outside of this. I think it just depends on like what your intentions are. So if your intentions are to like show in galleries and get notoriety, or like your intentions are for like personal self-discovery, in the end, I think like an art practice should be beneficial to you most of all. Like it definitely can benefit others, and it definitely can talk about like larger issues that can like, you know, that are global. But at the same time is like your impression of your own work, or what your work's helping you process, is probably the most important part about it. The only thing that can really subvert art itself would be limitations in freedom of speech, or limitations in freedom of expression. I don't see any other way for art to kind of be shut down. So like for the example you're using like AI, like a lot of people are seeing AI art as like a huge threat. I think it's very over exaggerated in terms of art. I could see where it has like some pretty serious implications in terms of like designers who are commissioned to design logos, for example, because, you know, obviously companies, their only goal is to cut costs regardless of morals. But for me personally, I think any technology, any way of creating images, regardless of how it's created, it can be used to like different ends. So like it all just depends on the ideas, the concepts that you have. In the end, processes are just tools. Like what you want to express can be done with almost any tool. What like matters most in like an artwork is what ideas you're trying to convey, what your personal experiences are, because that's what people care about. Like what story are you trying to tell? Like that probably to me is what matters most about like any artwork that is created.